good leader can be soft, he can be humble, he can be meek for these moments. But when things need to get violent, he'll turn the violence up and then he'll turn it back down. It's never personal. It's to push you, to grow you. If you're a leader, make sure you stay calm in whatever situation, and you will see the people around you mimic that calmness that you have. But if you panic and you lose your mind and you lose your control of your ego, everyone around you, you're going to develop a culture of that. You're going to create a situation like that. The most loving thing you can do to somebody who's trying to hurt you is disappear. Don't let them hurt you, because that'll decrease their dopamine response from chasing a target that they're able to hurt. Walking away hurt. It was scary because they were the family that I knew for a chapter in my life. But the reward was then making space, creating openings in my life for amazing friendships. And that was really cool.
I have a great show for you. In this podcast, I speak with Dan Joseph, the author of Backpack to Rucksack. In this book, we talk about all of his trials and tribulations, from childhood all the way to adulthood, how he went from experiencing abuse as a child to being an alcoholic and drug user throughout his 20s, to joining the military at 32 and transforming his life. Dan and I discuss everything from self-improvement to leadership. His story is very inspirational, and if you're a young man and you're lost in the world, you have shitty friends or shitty family members, you definitely want to tune in to this episode. Now, before I start the show, 98% of you guys are not subscribed. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. And if you're listening on any of the streaming networks, follow us and give us a 5-star review. Anyways, my name is Duran Brown, and this is the podcast, Philosophy for Life. Dan, man, I read your book, man, and the biggest thing I got from that was that you've been going through a major self-improvement journey. Before I dive into any of the military stuff, I want to know, like, who were you before joining the military compared to who you are now?
Well, man, that's a deep question. So who I was before, wow. Well, I want to say that I was always a nerdy kid who loved science, who was very introspective. The truth is, I grew up as a loner. I grew up as somebody who was the class clown because I always felt like an outsider. I get really existential. I think really deep thoughts. I grew up as the child of immigrants. My parents immigrated from Iraq. So culturally, I was always sort of different than the kids around me. And I connected well with others, but I always felt different. And that allowed me to be a divergent thinker. I like to deviate from the herd mentality because I have sort of an outsider's perspective is how I look at things. And then I worked in the biotech industry in the genetic research field. So again, being a huge nerd, I love science. I love molecular biology. When I was a kid, I remember spending a lot of time alone playing with a microscope, looking at things. Again, like I enjoy seeing things from a different perspective. And that fed into who I was, I would say, at work, just because I liked science. I liked thinking about almost abstract concepts, like, for instance, how I was in the world of genetics where people were creating artificial intelligence precursors called machine learning and neural networks, algorithms that would decode human genetics, well, genetics of any organism really, and look for disease biomarkers. And so just always had like a different take on life and perspective. And this was all before I joined the military. So,
Okay.
yeah. But one thing I will say is I was definitely lost in a lot of ways. I talk in the book about the party days and looking to find popularity in college. And that's where I kind of let go of my intellect and started dabbling in hedonism and things that would
Yeah.
make me relevant to the party crowd. And I was looking for validation.
I see. Did you think, from your story, what I get is that you were introverted growing up? Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. Introverted masquerading as a extrovert. So
Yeah.
I could do it, but it helped to be in party mode, if you will, to look. I was looking more for quality, or I'm sorry, quantity of friends than quality. Just trying to meet as many people as possible, network, and then, when alcohol and the drugs and all that kind of
Yeah.
fed into that. But I really longed for depth. I longed for substance. But
Mhm.
that's the introvert side of me. I love getting deep. But
Yeah.
man, there was a phase in my life where I just thought maybe if I find enough friends, I'll be happy. I'll find happiness.
I hear you. So you were looking basically for acceptance, right? Is
Mhm.
that is that true? Say in college, you were looking for a group, looking for people. You're looking for
Yep,
validation from people.
definitely. And now my father passed away a few years ago, and we sort of made amends to each other before he died, which was a huge blessing. But I realized I was looking for a father figure. I didn't have a strong relationship with my dad, and so I looked up to males who, man, I did what they did. When they told me to jump, I jumped, and
Yeah.
that led me down some dark paths. But I can't be ashamed of it because my story will help others. But I certainly don't want anyone to feel that they should judge themselves for making mistakes like that. When we seek male role models and we find guys who are cool in our eyes and guys who are dominant and guys who are leaders, and they want to groom us, then we do what the alpha does of the pack, right? We learn from
Yeah.
them, and ideally, it would be from a figure who loves us and cares for us and puts us on a path that'll sharpen us, not some of the paths that I went down.
I want to dive into fatherhood, man, because you said something I can relate to. I didn't have a good relationship with my father growing up. My father was a gangster. He wanted me to be a gangster. He treated people very crappy, including his family. He tormented people, and he didn't really want to see his kids do better than him. And
Mm,
it was just very abusive. And he spent a lot of time in prison. And at the age of 22, I decided to have a man-to-man conversation with my father, and my father he apologized, which I wasn't expecting. I expected him to blow up on me,
uh,
attack me. He
yeah,
apologized, and then it
wow.
kind of came back to me. I realized that I needed to let go of all this frustration if I was going to mature and reach the next stage of my evolution. And ever since I made that decision, we've had a great relationship. My father
Mm,
is who he is, and I am who I am. We share the same DNA, the same thing with the fathers before him. And because I understand myself better, I appreciate my father a lot more. If you don't mind, could you dive into the relationship that you had with your father, why it was so rocky, and
well,
being
yeah,
poor at the end?
yeah. I mean, thanks for sharing what you do. That's amazing to hear that. It's touching. Your story is powerful. Well, it all boils down to my father on his deathbed. I got uh, I got upset with my family because they're always running around really loud, and everybody's kind of like, "Oh my gosh, Dad's dying." He was dying of heart failure for several years, but I came home and all the lights were on. It was late, and everyone's on their phones, and I just kind of blew up, and uh, I slept at my cousin's house and yelled at everyone because they were just so loud. Anyway, I went to my dad the next day. He was on what I thought was his deathbed. It wasn't until a few weeks later that he actually passed. But I remember I told him, I was like, Dad, I got mad at the family because everyone is so loud, and I just wanted to sit there and contemplate the fact that I'm losing you. This is deep, and I feel bad. I got really upset, and my dad was always angry growing up. I remember that a lot of fights and stuff.
We can relate to that. My dad is
Yeah,
one of those too, man. Always angry. The
fire,
cabinet's
bro.
open, he's pissed off. But sorry,
So
I cut
much
you off.
fire. Yeah, my dad was a furnace, but I mean, he had a loving heart, but man, he was angry a bunch too, salty. But he looked at me and he had this moment where I thought he was gonna be upset and say, don't do that, don't be mean to people, or shape up, or stop being so sensitive, because he always said that to me. But he looked at me, I'll never forget this. He looked me dead in my eyes and said, he's like, Danny, you and I are the same person. That's why we fight so much. And it was this realization that, man, me and my dad we're both sensitive guys. I cry in movies. I'm a big softie. Shoot, I'll cry to a song. Um, I love jujitsu, so I'm not afraid of being sensitive because I know I could choke people out now, which is cool. But on that note, my father and I both compensated too. You know, we put up a front, we put up a facade of toughness, but really we're just babies inside, you know. And that was so healing for me. And then just to know that that's why my dad and I fought. You know, we were identical. We were the same personality, and I upset him because I mean, you know, people get triggered, people get upset when they see the things in themselves that annoy them in somebody else, right? That's what really sets us off is when we see that annoying characteristic that's in me in someone else. Oh, that'll set me off, right? So that's how my father and I antagonized each other. Not
Yeah.
till his dying days did we realize that. And then another thing, he did give me a gift of saying, when I told him, I said, Dad, you know, I mean, I told him, I was like, look, I don't want any regrets when you die. I'm not going to feel bad when we bury you, Dad. I said, there's not going to be one word unspoken between us. So whether we have to fight, whether we have to curse at each other, whatever it is, we're going to get this out. All right. And, you know, there were some heated moments, but on
Mhm.
this particular day, everything was said. And my dad looked at me and said, you know what? Um, don't feel bad for me when I die. Go live your life. You know, he had said he escaped Iraq, came to America to give us a dream, right? Freedom, a place where we're not going to be persecuted. And you know, because as Christian minorities over there in the Middle East, things can get pretty wild for us. And you know, a lot of my family got um, harassed or assaulted. Some were killed. And my father didn't want us to live that life. He wanted us to be here in America where we could live our dreams out. And that was his dying wish to me was go live your life, live out the freedom that, you know, your mother and I wanted you to have. You're the reason why we escaped, why we got out of there, to give you the life we could never have dreamt of. And what a gift to leave a son, you know, as a dying father.
Man, that's awesome. You know, there's a book called Iron John, and it talks about just manhood in general. And one of the things that it says is that it mentions the relationship that men have with their fathers, and it talks about regardless if your father's here, if he's dead, whatever he's done in the past, you know, all men, they need to get to a point where they realize that they share the same masculine energy with the men that with their father and with the men that came before
Mm,
them, and then basically forgiving their father is a great part of the healing process so that you can become that the best man that you can be.
yeah.
um, just to comment on your story, my father, he a month ago, he wanted me to fly out to Wichita. He said, hey, go visit your grandfather, you know, he's dying. And I've only met him once prior to going to visit him, so I was like, okay, I'll go, but I won't have another chance to talk to him. So I went out to Wichita, and he couldn't talk much because he's dying of cancer. He had his energy is really low. He tried to keep up with me, but I knew it was important that he rest. And the biggest thing that really spooked me, if anything, was that I know he spent a total of 24 years in prison, and he looked like me. He seemed calm, and he had the demeanor of me. And it's like, it reminded me that everybody, even though there's somebody that's like me, it reminded me that everybody is like going through something. And, you know, when we're going through these life situations, you know, we can make the wrong turn, and any of us can get caught up easily in some kind of, make the wrong mistake, you know, and it can
Yeah.
basically lead us down the wrong path. In your book, you mentioned that you had substance abuse prior to joining the military. Um, can you talk about what you were going through at that time when you're taking a substance abuse, and then why it led you to why that position you were in like led you to joining the military?
So, man, it was the party scene. You know, it all started so innocent, if you will. I mean, I never had alcohol in high school. I was valedictorian. I was a good
Mm-hmm.
kid. I was super squared away, but I grew up in a bubble, you know. In college, I was 17 years old. I was exposed to alcohol. Um, I There's a situation. I mean, I wrote about it in the book, but yeah, around that time, I actually experienced a sexual assault while I was intoxicated, and I won't go into the details now, but that kind of led me on a path of self medication just from the shame of that experience. And man, so that was 17. Started drinking, blacking out, you know, from day one, and then kept drinking alcohol. Later on, people introduced, you know, weed, and then I was in a situation with really high class upper crust kids, because that's what we were as kids, you know. And there's some that said, hey, we don't do marijuana. That's for poor kids. We do coke. And they were just saying like, this is the high class drug. This is what people with money do who are successful, who have successful parents. And that was just like, what the heck? Are you kidding me? Like, I thought the drug scene was all, sketchy and dark. And these kids were bright, shiny, loaded,
Mhm.
$120,000 sports cars, all the best clothes. And so I was around it a lot. I didn't start dabbling in the harder stuff for a while. I was hesitant. Tried it a couple times, but that was one girl. She told me, she's like, "Yeah, I have a cocaine lawyer." I'm like, what's that? She's like, "Well, my dad gets busted a lot with coke, and he's got a lawyer who knows all the judges. So the lawyer just gets all the felony wiped off his record every time."
Wow.
And she was like, "Yeah, so anytime I get in trouble in college, I have that same lawyer's phone number, my daddy's lawyer." And I'm like, that's some weird stuff, man. I mean, some eccentric stories.
Hmm.
So I was looking at this as a lens of, again, I grew up with parents who were from a Middle Eastern country, right? A third world country, if that's still the terminology for it, underdeveloped, whatever it is. I mean, but I grew up seeing these kids thinking like, this is top notch stuff. These are, kids who are, children of Hollywood producers and really, really big names, professional
Hmm.
athletes. And I was
Wow.
looking at them like, dang, I mean, it was hard not to get influenced by them, just by who their parents were, the names that they could drop. And I won't drop those names now, but there's some
Yeah.
celebrities that are, you know what I mean? Like world famous.
Yeah.
And it really impacted me because I was desperate. And I talk about it in the book, man. I was desperate to be seen. I was desperate to be validated. And I just remember that even right now, I feel that anxiety in my chest of like, how do I keep up with these guys, man? How do the stories that they would drop, right? As we're drinking, just the stuff they'd say, oh, guess who I hung out with this weekend? Guess what movie set I was on? Guess who I did, coke with backstage, all this stuff. I'm sitting there like a nobody, right? I'm a fly on the
Yeah.
wall essentially. And I felt like, I remember one kid, I was so broke, and he told me his dad, the day he was born, his father bought him a house in Orange County, and every one of his kids, the day that they were born. So they were born in the '80s, right, or '90s, whatever it was. They each grew up with a house, several $1 million homes that their father said, when you turn 18, you can sell the house, you can rent it, you can manage real estate, whatever you want. And I remember I was like, oh, can I like buy you food or something? I remember asking like several times if I could like get him something. I remember he looked at me and had this moment like, hey, stop trying to buy stuff. I'm your friend. You don't have to buy me anything. But I remember that feeling of like, but I don't deserve to be your friend. You guys are so cool. All these politicians and all these. And again, it was that lack of internal validation, man. And a lot of their lives were just self-medicated on drugs too, by the way. A lot of them were doing drugs at a young age just because they didn't see their parents, man. They had all the money, but you could tell the relationship with their own families was strained. And so all they knew was to numb out. We were all just numbing out from a lack of validation. But I didn't see that in them. All I saw was the gaping hole inside of my soul.
It's interesting hearing your story because the neighborhood that I grew up in, it was murder capital in like '92, and I've always been an athlete, and that's opened doors for me. And I went to a very prestigious high school, and I went to a high school with politicians' kids, famous athletes' kids, and I remember going to the house parties, and these were girls I saw every day at school. And then I went to the house parties and I see tables with lines of Coke. And I was like, oh my God, like this is how you get down. And
Mm,
listening to your story, you're giving me another perspective about it that these kids, because they had so much, it made you feel less. And then because they were doing that, you felt like you had to like include yourself into that activity, So it's
yeah,
I definitely been there, it's just interesting to hear that perspective. So let's go to you joining the military. You joined the
yeah.
military at 32.
Mm.
What was that like? And then did you have any kind of like insecurity, like going into the military at that old age? Because typically people do it at like 18. Like,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, of course. I
yeah.
was very insecure is a good word, very insecure about it. But I started making friends when I left the party scene. I knew I wasn't happy with it. You know, everybody was self-medicating, man. It was either alcohol or uppers or downers, right? On a cycle, day and night. It was just wake up, do one substance, do another one, right? To party at the clubs, to come back down, to go to sleep. And then I started bumping into like military guys, but they weren't doing the drugs. You know, they were out partying, they're out drinking or so being social, but they there's something different to them. And I noticed, I mean, obviously they can't, there's urinalysis, right? We kind of get drug tested a bunch. So they weren't doing the drugs. But what I noticed is they had awesome hobbies like rock climbing and surfing and all this stuff that was like during the daytime while we were recovering and sleeping. And so I started talking to them and asking them about their lifestyle and getting to know them. And I met a couple. One of the biggest things that changed my life was I became friends with a Navy SEAL, and he started working out with me. And man, I was vomiting every run. I was puking my brains out. But I noticed there's something primal about his drive and that primal energy, that masculinity, that aggression, right? That healthy aggression was way different than the self-medicated process of being out there in the party scene. So I was immediately magnetized to him. And we became good friends. And his roommate was also a SEAL, so I worked out with him. They taught me everything: how to run, how to swim, like I was a kid, like man child, right? And this was in my mid-20s. And then I progressively kind of grew up talking to these guys and met a bunch of dudes from the Marine Corps, Army, Navy, and became friends with all these folks. And then I realized, like, I want to be one of them. I want this life where I can be athletic and paid for that, paid to be fit. You know, that's cool. There's a fitness standard, and I love that it created that boundary between, you know, from drug use, from people with on substances or that we shouldn't be on, man. I love that. I love that they it felt protected around them. Like there's values there that people in the civilian world don't necessarily have to have. And so I was really drawn to that Spartan lifestyle, if you will. I know a lot of them. And so when I talked to them about age, man, they batted that fear away so quickly. They basically said, if you join the military at an older age, guess what? You have more wisdom to share. You've made more mistakes. You have more stories to tell people, to guide younger people. Just don't do it in a preachy way. Don't be on a soapbox. Don't condescend. Don't patronize people. Be there willing to be engaged for wise counsel. If somebody notices your age and wants to talk to you, which they did, they said, just don't put people down. Just come in with a humble attitude. Be physically fit, because that trumps age. Nobody cares what age you are in the military. They just care that you can rock and that you can march and that you can carry your buddy if you got to carry your buddy who's wounded, right? That's it. Being humble, that was their biggest advice, you know, from enlisted guys and officers both, who are dear friends of mine, who I wrote about in the book. If I wasn't humble, they'd punch me in the face, because that means I'm disrespecting a guy in their position. And I love these guys like my brothers, you know? And so out of respect for them, I did my best to keep my mouth shut and just love on people. And age was never a factor.
One question I'm wondering, this is something that I struggled with, and I still kind of struggle with, to be honest. I've been around athletes since I was 4 years old, and I thought everybody had the mindset of an athlete. I read in your book that you wake up at 4 a.m. You know, I wake up at 4 a.m. You know, it's just a part of my routine, and I have a schedule that I stick to on a daily basis that encompasses exercise, reading, and also, you know, my business, doing things like this. And I found it hard after football ended to relate to everyday people. Since you've been, just the mindset of everyday people, since you've been in the military, can you see a difference between the mindset of a soldier compared to the mindset of a civilian, and how do you handle it?
So, okay, yes, 100%. I thought when I got out of the Army, I can go back to being a civilian. I can't. Once you're a veteran, you're different. You're changed. You're broken in so many good ways, man. Right now, my friends are a bunch of young kids who are in the military. One of my best friends right now he's going to be a Navy SEAL. He's in Buds, and he's 19 years old. One of my best friends I met in the Army was 18 when I met him, and I was 32, and we're still friends to this day. Brent's one of the coolest dudes ever. And there's, again, that primal aggression that people in the military have, that some folks, some civilians have it, but a lot don't. And I don't want to say I don't get along with them. It's like I do. I mean, I feel like I can get along with anyone, but I prefer to be around these driven guys who are just aggressive with their goal setting and physical, and cerebral. Both. It's, they're not just knuckle draggers. I mean, these guys are smart. And right now, I'm actually, like, I don't want to say too much, but there's some contracts that I'm looking at right now to get back in the military world, at least on the reserve side. There may be other options on the horizon that are on the active duty side. I don't know if I'm actually going to go with that, but there's a lot happening right now. And there's a government position that's, yeah, again, I can't really talk about it, but needless to say, I changed when I got out, and the career paths that I'm right now training for they're quite physical, very physical. And I've got to be the fittest I've ever been. And I'm 36 years old.
It's
And
nothing but a thing, man. That's
well,
nothing but
what's crazy, what's so cool about what's going on right now, these kids fire me up. I quit caffeine about 2 weeks ago. I was doing a lot of coffee. Oh, I say doing it like it's a drug, but caffeine is a stimulant, right? So, but I was around 1,000 milligrams a day, that's a lot. And I stopped that, and I realized it was just a crutch, but I'm just as physical and just as active without caffeine. And it's because of these young folks around me, because I see their drive, and I love them, man. I love them. Like, this is how, when I was a platoon leader, I saw the soldiers like they were my kids or my brothers. It's so difficult to put into words the love you have for somebody who's willing to die for you, who's willing to lose their life. I'm getting emotional thinking about it, because I worked with a lot of guys who were combat vets, man, and I'd see it in their eyes. They a lot of them, they lost their buddies, right? A lot of them almost lost their lives, have permanent injuries to their bodies, because one guy I know, he ripped every ligament in his shoulder trying to pull a guy out of a burning Humvee to keep him alive. These are some of the most humble service members, humble humans on the planet, and complete badasses, right? And I mean, you're working with someone like that, where as an officer, as a junior officer, I could order them to do something and they do it, and that's not something to take lightly. And there's a love for these guys that I have. I respect the crap out of them, and I always tell enlisted guys, never let an officer talk down to you. I don't care what rank a guy has. He's a human being, and you're a human being, and you deserve dignity and respect, A. And B, on top of that, if you're the guy willing to get shot in the face, you are the most important person in that brief. It's not the officer who draws a little cute diagram that says you're going to go from point A to point B. Like, this is your grid coordinate. This is how you're going to get there. This is the mission set. It's like, dude, those 18-year-old kids that are willing to die for that mission, those are the VIPs in the room. We should roll the red carpet out for them. And I know that's so counterintuitive to so many leaders who cringe at that thought. Don't let the lower ranking guys speak up. Don't let them have opinions. They don't earn their opinion until they're in for a decade. I'm sorry I'm going on a rant right now, but this is the kind of stuff that made me realize there's a difference between the military world and the civilian world that's indescribable at times.
Man, you said a lot of stuff there, man.
Sorry, I'm a talker.
No, man, because I had a question for you, but then you said something that really stood out to me. Leadership. Because you mentioned that don't take crap from somebody that's basically officer above you. Can we just talk about leadership? What are the signs of a good leader? And I want to know, well, let's take on that. What are the signs of a good leader for right now?
Well, I'll tell you. All right. So going back to the first Navy SEAL that I was ever friends with, I mean, the guy's a stud, right? He was the fittest. He's an officer. He was the fittest in his platoon. When we worked out together, he'd smoke me on these runs, right? He would push me to my breaking point. But he would do this thing where he'd be so close to me, man, the entire time, enabling me, pushing me, motivating me. If he ever did blast off to go do a run, he'd circle back and collect me again. Never once did we do a workout together where he just wrecked me and made fun of me or put me down or said, you know, you're not anywhere near my level. Like, who do you think you are? There's no condescension. He was humble, but he was primal at the same time. And I think that combination, it's so hard to put into words, but there's this humility is the best thing in a leader. But you know that feeling, like in jujitsu, I don't know if you roll, but in jujitsu with the black belt, a black belt will touch you so softly. Like when they grab you so lightly until they thrash you or they execute that move to submit you, right? Then it's hard. Then it's violent. It's a violence of action in that burst. They throttle it. That's what a good leader does. A good leader can be soft. He can be humble. He can be meek for these moments. But when things need to get violent, he'll turn the violence up and then he'll turn it back down. It's never personal. It's to push you, to grow you, to show you something. But then, just like my SEAL buddy would do, collect the guy back up, pick him back up, help him out, show him the way, and let him get there, right? Not just bully him and keep him down. And I grew up with some abuse in childhood that I talk about in the book, and it set me up for some bad behaviors and self-medicating. And that to me is an example of somebody in a position of power who aggressively hurts somebody to keep them down. That's toxic leadership. To use rank, to use power, to use whatever it is to keep somebody down, keep them in their place. A humble leader will pick somebody up and elevate them. You speak to them like the man that they are. You don't speak down to them like an object, or you know what I mean? You elevate somebody. That's what a leader does. They chisel that statue out of that marble. They bring it out of you. And I mean, there's something primal and beautiful about that between men that I think is so badass.
Leaders create leaders. Good leaders create leaders themselves. They don't try to just have subordinates, basically.
Yes.
You mentioned Greg. Is Greg the guy that you're referring to in this story?
So Greg is the Green Beret. No, he's not the SEAL. He's the Green Beret. And sorry, it took me a second because some of these guys I had to change their name for OPSEC, Operational Security.
Okay.
So okay. I don't want to say his real name, but it's So yes, Greg is the Green Beret. He had some amazing words of wisdom. Yeah.
I'm wondering, like you mentioned in that chapter with Greg, you mentioned that his leadership taught you how to handle stress. You mentioned that. You mentioned stress. You mentioned self-improvement throughout your book. What are some of the tools that you've learned that you've applied to managing your stress?
Man, the biggest thing, again, is humility, and because that ties into ego control. And that's what I learned in jiu-jitsu. That's something Greg taught me. Greg was like, look, man, guys are going to talk. They're going to talk a big game. They're going to talk about, I'm great at this. I'm badass at this. I'm the guy to look to, blah, blah, blah. He said, always keep your mouth shut. Let your work ethic talk for itself. Jiu-jitsu, beautiful example of this. You tell somebody how good you are at anything, their hands will be on your throat and you'll be passing out in half a second, you know? So what I learned is, man, control the ego, because if you buck hard disrespectfully, if you buck against a black belt in jiu-jitsu, if you react emotionally, if you let your aggression show in an angry way, they will police that up real fast. And it's in order to keep the gym safe. They want people to check themselves, otherwise they will have them checked in order that they don't hurt other clients. Because think about it, you have an aggressive male and he rolls with a smaller female and injures her. Like, dude, every single black belt on that gym will be pounding that guy's daylights out in the parking lot. So there's, again, this primal tribal feeling to sparring on the mats. And that translates to leadership. We talk about jiu-jitsu, everything we learn on the mats, it translates to real life. I mean, these are all philosophical approaches to life. And that's the biggest thing a leader can do, is to humble their ego. Because when you do slow down your ego, when you check it, man, your breath rate slows down. You get more deep breaths, right? Belly breaths, less in the upper chest, less hyperventilation. You slow down your breath. You get prefrontal cortex going. You're not just limbic, animalistic minded. You're more meditative. You're more thoughtful about your approach. How will I react? And again, it's about throttling that violence. How much you're going to react with, how intense, how angry you're going to be, what kind of boundary you're going to set. And it appropriately fits the environment. So you don't ever yell at subordinates if you don't have to yell. If you do have to yell, you'll yell, but they'll know there's a reason for it. If you don't have to, then you approach it with calm. And one thing I learned from an amazing leader who gave us an intense story. He's an EOD who talked about some guys getting blown up in the Middle East on a mission, and one guy, his head was like all that was left was like the upper part of his head, but he was still gurgling.
Mm-hmm.
And the medic came out. The medic started panicking because he sees this what looked like a corpse still breathing, and he was about to start panicking. All the soldiers around looked at the medic, and the medic was about to freak out. And this EOD runs up to him and grabs the medic and just shakes him and looks at his eyes and says, "Look at me. Stay calm. Everybody is looking at you right now. You can't lose your mind. Help this guy out as much as you can help him, and then move on to the next guy." And the medic just took a deep breath, got to work on that guy. Couldn't save his life, but did his damnedest to save him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what that EOD told us, and this was an officer in the military who said, calm is contagious, panic is contagious. If you're a leader, make sure you stay calm in whatever situation, and you will see the people around you mimic that calmness that you have. But if you panic and you lose your mind and you lose your control of your ego, everyone around you, you're going to develop a culture of that. You're going to create a situation like that. So he always told us, no matter what the circumstance, if it is life and death, whatever it is, stay calm as a leader, because you'll see the people around you, they will emulate that. And that's a
Yeah,
gift.
that's the truth. I've honestly put people in leadership positions before that it turned out to be a mistake, because it impacts the culture. If you bring in bullying, you can make good people do bad things just because they stepped into that kind of environment. I've also seen it at I compete in boxing and karate, and you can tell when somebody. It's just funny how the people who are the best at that martial art are the calmest, the kindest people. It's usually the beginners who are, or the beginners, or the people who have a sense of ego that are trying to throw their weight around, or make people feel small. That's some people just have a bully mentality. I want to know, what are the most challenging aspects of being in the military?
Showing love and being strong at the same time, being sensitive to those around you, to understand, being sensitive to those who are too afraid to tell you that they're feeling something deep. I mean, I had a soldier survive his suicide attempt, and man, I told him, I was like, bro, hey, I'm glad you're alive, but what the heck? Like, I could have gone to his funeral, and I'll never forget, you know, because he didn't want to talk about what he was going through. I knew something was up. We had several talks, but it got to a moment where he wanted to take his own life. So he wrote a note. He made the attempt, and survived it. And again, working with combat vets who've been blown up, shot at, had their buddies torn to pieces in front of them. I mean, they don't tell you these stories. They don't share the demons in their heads. They don't share with you that every night they go to bed, they hear screams of the guys that were on the radio that they saw getting shot at, but they couldn't reach. That they had certain leadership positions or people above them that did not enable them to save lives. And not reacting, right, as a leader to their emotionality, if they're in a flashback, if they're raging inside, and something's off, but you don't know what's causing it, right? It's so important as a leader to not throw fuel onto that fire, because I've worked with guys who told me, man, they contemplated killing themselves every night, and being kind to them at work gave them a reason to have hope that things could get better. The hardest part about being in the military is when things suck. It's 125 degrees. You're in your full kit, the desert, the environment, it's austere. Comms aren't working, whatever the issue is, the vehicles, the convoy gets split up. You're driving in the middle of the night, the terrain gets crazy, and you swear you're going to drive off a cliff, and everybody's going to die with you. And you're just stressing out over everything, right? To remember that the way you speak to those around you, man, that carries beyond the mission set. That was the hardest part, to remember if I freak out right now because my convoy's about to get lost and I have this grid coordinate to get to, and we have to get there at a certain hit time in order to conduct the training mission and all that stuff. If I start yelling and losing my mind, there could be a guy who's in the middle of a fight with his wife because he's drinking so much because it's his buddy's birthday who we lost in Iraq or Afghanistan, right? And then I'm being a jerk to him at work. That just adds fuel to that fire. So I always tell new leaders going in the military, man, don't be afraid to be sensitive. Don't be afraid to be empathetic to those around you. We're not machines, man. And in fact, I would I would definitely profess that the most mechanical, strong looking, acting, tough guy mentality, those are the ones hurting the most. Um, yeah. Sorry to rant so much, but that was the hardest part because you want to react, man. You want to complain, and we all complain. Soldiers, they say when soldiers complain, things are good. It's when people stop, when people go silent, that's when you need to worry. But yeah, definitely controlling ego and just showing love to these guys because they may you may be the last person, the only person to show them love. You know.
People don't really appreciate, well, from my personal experience, a lot of people don't appreciate peace until they went through something, a dark experience. These guys that you've been, your brothers, your soldiers at war, they've been through something. They've seen violence. They've dealt with their demons. They're dealing with other people's demons. When you grow up in a very hard neighborhood as well, and you hear gunshots, you see dead bodies, and you understand that life is precious. You appreciate peace and manners, and you empathize with people because you know that things can instantly go left really fast. It's really a maturity thing that I think a lot of people. I think it's a human experience. It's a part of being. There's an aspect of being a human, to being a man, that a lot of people don't get to experience anymore because we live in a safe environment and we have all our needs met. But part of our spirit will always, if we don't experience these different parts of our character, part of our spirit is always going to be lost and searching for an outlet or something around those lines. That's what I'm thinking, man. You said that the military, well, from what I got through your book, is that the military has helped you. It's helped you grow and helped you, basically. You had like a flight or freeze type of response.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what that was all about? Like, you never said fight. You always said reference flight or freeze.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people are dealing with that level of anxiety. What was that all about? And how did you overcome that?
Okay. Well, jujitsu is where this all came out. So I had experienced abuse as a child, physical abuse at a very young age. I was unable to help myself. I was very small. And at that age, when you're overwhelmed by violence, the nervous system will go into a freeze response, or fawn, which is sort of a fainting response. And I was doing jujitsu, and my coach, who amazing, he's a world renowned champ, great guy. He saw me trying to execute the move he just showed us, which was an offensive move on the mats. It was like I forget what it was. It was something related to the darce. It was some sort of choke. And I stopped. I put my hands on my opponent where I was supposed to put them, and then I just froze. And he was like, what are you doing? Do the move I just showed you. Like, hello. And I'm sitting there like unable to do the move. I'm ready for it. I'm ready to do the move, right? I couldn't. And then I got into this really dark phase of just hearing thoughts in my mind, or not hearing thoughts, but I remember feeling inadequate. I remember feeling shame and feeling just lost and just this darkness setting. And one of my friends, he's a DEA agent, really cool dude. I told him about some like depressive symptoms I was getting, just feeling some weird thoughts telling me like that I'm not worthy. And man, because I was doing jujitsu twice a day. So I was getting with these, it's called psychosomatic markers, meaning like stored in the body type memories. So my buddy was like, look, dude, I have a therapist that I go to. I want you to have a couple sessions with him and talk to him about this. And I did. I went. And so the therapist had me in his office and we talked about it and said, where do you feel the freeze response? Where do you feel this in your body? So I was like, well, I feel this hole in my gut, like it's just this dark emptiness. But I said, my shoulders want to activate. And he said, well, what do your shoulders want to do? I'm like, they want to push something. They want to shove. And so he had me stand up and push on the stool with him. It was this crazy experience. And then I had this flashback where I was pushing on a door as a very small child. And I heard the abuser's voice on the other end basically saying, like, you can't hide from me. I'm coming to get you. And you're going to get what's coming. And I just started weeping, man. My shirt was just drenched in like tears. And I had no idea. I was like, oh my gosh, like, what was that about? He's like, well, you just had flashback. And he said, so what you have is called, it's a form of PTSD. It's called CPTSD. He said that you're having a freeze response in jiu-jitsu because you're, as a child, when you're abused at that young of an age, your motor responses to protect yourself are offline. So he said, you don't have an offensive motor response. You have a defensive motor response because as a kid, I would just ball up and take the punishment, the beating, you know? So yeah, so in jiu-jitsu it came out, and then through therapy, I grieved, man. I grieved a lot. I never cried so much in my life, and I'm a crier. But I processed that stuff. I processed it out of my body. And now when I do jiu-jitsu, I don't have that response. But I did throughout the military, I was rolling and training with guys, and I had one brown belt in the Army told me to roll with my eyes shut. So I wouldn't, my breath control would skyrocket and my fear would just be gone because I would feel the opponent. I would use proprioception to know where his body weight was, where he's going. I could predict his moves with my eyes closed. I was able to do better jiu-jitsu than looking and trying to read the situation because my brain was getting overwhelmed. So I continued to hone in my nervous system, slow down, ground myself, feel my belly breath, sip air if I'm getting choked out, just like breathe, like, protect my jugular, protect my carotid artery, and just basically find these moments of peace in the middle of this, that crazy wave of getting rolled and getting pummeled. And man, it brought me back to childhood a lot, but then I was able to overcome that through grappling. So that helped a lot.
Your story reminds me of something I went through. I've always, growing up, I was always a fighter. I enjoyed fighting. I was never a bully, but if somebody bullied me, I would amplify it just so that fight could happen. And I remember when I was 14, this kid had took our ball, and before he took our ball, I told him, because I'm pretty calm, and he had never seen that side of me before, and he didn't take me serious when I said don't touch our ball. He touched our ball. He was being goofy, laughing about it, and I beat him up. And I remember when I was punching him, it made me so sick. My friends didn't know this, they're just watching, laughing, but it made me sick. And I went home and I was sitting down, just like, man, this doesn't feel right anymore. I had never had that feeling. And when I finally got into combat sports around like 18, I remember that it was really hard for me to hit somebody the way I used to, because I was afraid of hurting somebody, and reliving that experience of seeing that guy's eyes and all that stuff. And I had to get through some kind of I don't know what it is. I never went to therapy for that, but I remember it would torment me. I would think about that person's eyes and how it felt, how it made me feel. And just doing boxing and doing karate has been helping me get over that. But I know I definitely have held back in some of my my sparring matches and my fights. But yeah, anyways, I go down that circle. I need some therapy, man.
Everybody does. It's like an oil change, man. Whoever has a car and doesn't get an oil change, crazy, right? That's how I see therapy. But that's my own. That's because I got my master's in psych and I love psychology, man. But I think every person should get it.
Let's talk about that, man. You do mention that you have a degree in psychology. You mentioned that you've dove into self-improvement books, and you also mentioned that you read a lot of books and it's helped you read people better. Can you talk about the self-improvement books that you have a tendency to read? And I mean, yeah, that you have a tendency to read, and then also um, how you use them in your day-to-day life.
So just off the top of my head, so I'm friends with Jocko Willink. So Extreme Ownership was a great book. I have to say that's one of my most gifted books that I give out. That and Carol Dweck's Mindset is also huge. Um, there's another book from I think it was a CIA officer, but it's called What Every Body is Saying, and it's about deception and reading body language. Um, I've read books. I like Brene Brown. She's great. And there's so many. I've read a lot of like clinical therapy books as well. Um,
But you mentioned that
so
these books are a part of your evolution. You mentioned that
yeah,
taking time, doing your jujitsu, definitely being around the fellas, and then reading these self-improvement books. And the reason I
yeah,
want to know this is because my life changed when I started reading more books. Right when I finished playing football, a friend of mine, she bought me a book called The Ultimate Athlete. And I did everything within that book, and I thought it was a great book. And ever since then, I've been reading self-improvement books. And then years go by, and before you know it, you're a completely different person. You're a
yeah.
more peaceful, relaxed person. So I'm just wondering, like, how has reading martial arts, how has it all helped you evolve into who you are?
So the reading is great because it puts words to things. It puts labels on feelings. It gives me language to describe what's happening inside. Um, and what's big about that, it's there's a phrase in psychology called interoception, and it's what you're feeling inside. It could be I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm stressed, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm frustrated. Just think of the word angry. I'm angry, I'm upset, frustrated, angsty, livid, betrayed. I mean, the more language you have, the more high resolution. It's like going from an old school television set to like 8K. The higher resolution, the more it's a higher definition way of looking at the world, looking at your world. And what's great about that is the more you map out your inner world, the better you are at mapping out the inner world of other people, and the less reactive you can be to their stuff. Hey, this is his reaction. This is her reaction. They're in the middle of their flashback. They're in the middle of their ego defensiveness, their own insecurity, their own fear. They're projecting that on me. And you learn
Mhm.
terminology like projection, triangulation, gaslighting. There's so many different phrases that people throw around in the mainstream media as well a lot now. But when you understand it at a clinical level, not that I have a clinical degree, my degree is not clinical, but I've read the clinical manuscripts and the research that comes out, and peer-reviewed journal publications and whatnot, contemporary research, which I quote in the book as well. That allows me to have a greater understanding and a greater empathy for others. And this is what's really cool about it. And you're an athlete, so you get it about playing your tapes back and playing the tapes of maybe your opponents and studying their plays. When you can write down predictively how somebody in your life is going to react because you understand their psychological profile, and you go hang out with them, and you don't throw this in their face. It's extremely taboo to do that. So don't do that. Keep it to yourself. But you can write down, I know that they're within 5 minutes of hanging out with this individual, they're going to condescend, they're going to emasculate me, they're going to compare me to someone else, and they're going to flex on me regarding their bank account. And then boom, 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 they do all of that, right? And I realize it all ties their inadequacies that they have inside, that they're attempting to medicate or alleviate by bullying me or putting me down. Then the onus is on me to not invest as much time hanging out with that person, to then invest in the person who is going to build me up, who's going to compliment me, who's going to push me to do something greater with myself. That's what I started realizing. There's a book called The Games People Play and The Scripts People Live. Those are two different books. And they these are psychology books that tell you that basically people are living out versions of themselves that are inauthentic, and they're frustrated. The majority of human beings on our
Mm.
planet are frustrated with themselves, I believe, because they're playing a role that they were told to play,
Whoa.
and they can't help but subconsciously react in prickly ways in order to It's like a valve to release the pressure. So they release the pressure by passive aggression, by saying things to others, and if you feel it in your gut, this inauthenticity, there's not this congruence about them. But man, when you bump into somebody in life who is congruent, who has integrity with who they are on the inside and the outside, they literally are integrated with their ego identity. They never put you down. They never flex on you. They don't overcompensate. And I'm blessed to have several friends like that in my life who never have a negative thing to say. It's amazing. It's almost like, how does this person exist? The people that I associated with before, I would never believe a person like this exists. And then I met them and I realized I can filter for people like this in my life. And it's just fed my soul by having an intimate circle of friends like that, for sure. Not tons of them, but just enough. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know what you're saying because I've been through the same journey. It's not a journey that I went out to look for, but just through self-improvement and being very ambitious, doing martial arts and things like that. It helped me really analyze who I was, analyze my own thinking. And as my thinking improved, I became more cautious of the people I had around me and how their thinking was wired because I wasn't judging them. What I saw in them, I saw in me at some point in time. I couldn't understand what they were going through. And I went through a process where I was actually trying to, like, especially if they're good friends, you want to help your good friends out. But some people you can't help, and you have to walk away from it, man. You just, if you're around negative people and they're trying to bring you down because they're not dealing with their own shit, that's just how it is. You also mentioned like protecting your circle in your book. How has your relationships changed since you've become the person you are now? Have you had to walk away from certain relationships? Have you, had those types of heartbreaks?
Yeah, absolutely. Heartbreak's a good word for it. I learned that, like you said, you can't force people to change. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make a drink, right? So, um, yeah, I created distance between some folks who used to be very, very close to me. But I did it with love, not resentment. That was huge because I could be a very resentful person, very petty. And I learned to not do that. I learned to, out of love, honestly, love for them too. I think as somebody who suffered abuse, I can say, and for anybody out there who suffered abuse, um, enabling somebody to have a target, being allowing someone to abuse you is enabling their abuse. The most loving thing you can do to somebody who's trying to hurt you is disappear. Don't let them hurt you because that'll decrease their dopamine response from chasing a target that they're able to hurt. Um, and it's not selfish to do that. So creating that distance, if you got to cut them out entirely, do it. Um, there's no problem telling somebody too, because of this behavior, I can't have you in my life. Like, I love you, I want good for you, but for now, no. And saying no is a powerful thing to do. It's so hard to do that. It's so hard to learn that word. But once you do, you can say no to the wrong people that are in your life hurting you. And then you can say yes to the people who love you and nurture you. Um, for anybody I've had to, yeah, I mean, especially the party scene, people doing drugs, people introducing me to bad things, walking away hurt. It was scary because they were the family that I knew for a chapter in my life. But the reward was then making space, creating openings in my life for amazing friendships. And that was really cool. So it took a while because digging for quality always takes a while. But man, the people that I was blessed to meet, that I believe God put in my life, wow, man, jet fuel. It was like putting jet fuel in the tank. They just fired me up. They
I
still
hear
do.
you. I hear you. Your story touches me, man. I'm not just saying that
Thank
because
you.
I can relate to you on a lot of different levels. We have a few more minutes left. I want to know, how has being in the military changed your perspective on life?
Just made me aware that there are quiet professionals out there who carry so many burdens that they're oftentimes they're too afraid to even disclose to themselves. And I don't want to say afraid as a point of weakness, because these are some of the strongest people that I've ever met. But they understand the implications of really looking with sober eyes at something that happened in the past. And I was told by one of them, an amazing sergeant that I got to work with, and he raised me up in the Army, and he told me that what I did in jujitsu, what I experienced in jujitsu, the flashbacks, the the pain of having to face the past, gave him, it allowed me to be a guide to him through his stuff, from what he saw in Iraq. Um, that was the coolest part, is that a man can connect with another man based on pain. And you can do it in a way that drives people forward towards achieving a success through a grueling, honest process. It's not easy by any means. It's so much easier to just crack open a bottle. I love whiskey. I love scotch. And there's so many ways that I would love to numb out, but I don't, and when you encourage other people not to, that's the coolest part about being a dude, to go up to another guy and love on him and tell him, like, hey man, you got some darkness in you. We all have the darkness in us. And I'll be with you as you walk through it. If you want to talk about it, if you want words to describe it, I'm here for you. That was the coolest thing I learned in the military, is that you can do that with somebody I've never been to war. I was part of a non-deployable unit. But I was able to connect with guys who were there for the first and second wave. They were there in the beginning of the wars, right? And I was able to teach them stuff about their inner world that they had no idea. They had no words for. And we're talking decades of self-medicating, decades of pain. And again, it all comes down to love. It all comes down to love. I know that's such like a sappy word, but you can be a hard dude and still love. And I think, if anything, it takes more courage to do that. I wish they taught that more when it came to military leadership.
I think a lot of men, the way we talk about love and we see love in the Western world, we see it as like cutesy and being weak. But I think men really learn how to love through other men, because you really only get that kind of understanding through, I want to say, through going through this masculine journey. Love is more than just roses and telling your girlfriend you love her, and holding hands. When I said heartbreak, I personally had to walk away from friendships that meant the world to me. I mean, I've lost more sleep over a friendship ending than I did over a relationship.
Yeah.
And it's because I love those guys. Guys don't say it. I want my friends telling me they love me all the time, nothing like that. But I did, if I really think about it, I love those guys. And it broke my heart to walk away from that situation.
Yeah.
The last question I have for you is, any advice that you would give to young men who are interested or thinking of joining the military?
Yeah, I would say my biggest advice is get to know yourself, get to know your ego deficits, get to know your weaknesses psychologically and emotionally. Because the more you work on yourself, the more you clean yourself up internally when it comes to your anger, your resentments in life, frustrations, where you feel inadequate, where you feel you're weak, and where you want to improve. If you address those things preemptively, you'll be a leader who doesn't subconsciously stress your guys out, where you won't condescend, you won't have these aspects, professionally speaking, where you use your rank to belittle others or hurt them or keep them down. The more you work on yourself and shape yourself privately, you will publicly benefit those that you work with. It's called pro-social. You'll show pro-social behaviors, meaning you want the group to succeed, you want the team to succeed, you want to enable others. And all of that comes from you knowing who you are, accepting your flaws, working on them, and loving yourself where you're at, being patient with yourself. The danger of not doing that is being a leader who subversively hurts others, and you may not even be aware of it. There could be a tone in your voice that you have no idea you have, but when all your guys are sucking out there in the field and everything is just horrible and they hear the way you talk to them, it's like dog whistling. They're just like, they want to not bring you back from the desert after that mission's done, right? You don't want to be a leader like that. You want to be a leader where your guys will make sure no matter what happens, you'll succeed in your mission set. Um, that's huge. The healthier you are, the healthier society is going to be. The healthier the world's going to be.
I hear you. Amen. All right, Dan, thank you for being on the show, man. I really enjoyed this. Time went by. I could talk
Thank you.
for
This is so cool. So easy talking to you.
yeah, I can relate to you on a lot of different things, man. Like I said, I didn't get through your book. I got through 50% of it, but as I was reading your stories and then how you related them to like the psychological meaning behind these stories and what they did for you, I couldn't help but smile because I went through this. I went through and I'm going through the same journey. It's all about evolution and being conscious of who you are, what you're doing, what you say, and the impact you have on others in the world. So, yeah, man, your book is great. What, when you joined the military, did you plan on writing a book or was it just like,
No, this was honestly, I wanted to process. This whole book was written. So my soldier who survived his suicide attempt, Cody, he wrote the intro to the book. I wrote this book because I was processing the fact that I almost lost him. I was asking myself, was I a bad leader? Did I do something wrong? What did I miss? Where could I have been better? Because I look at my soldiers like they're my kids, man. I care for them a lot. And I'm so glad he's alive today. We're still in touch. I still check in on him. He's out of the military now. But I wrote this book after I got out to simply process so much weight that I felt because of the weight that these soldiers carry. And I felt compelled to write a manual, if you will, to help others like them and like myself have some objectivity, right? Because everyone's got an opinion, right? But I thought if I back this up with science, I can guide myself towards understanding what healthy leadership looks like, see what qualities I have that are healthy, see what qualities I have that are unhealthy, and then come up with a plan to continue shaping myself. So this book was just, man, is just to process a lot of weight that I felt, and I figured maybe it's going to help others. Maybe there's going to be some new military leaders that can read it and have the guidance that I was so lucky to have through these SEALs, MARSOC officers, Green Berets, pilots, all these amazing folks, EODs, and I put all their advice in the book. I just want to give back as much as possible.
Man, everybody is having this journey. Everybody is having this journey. I think that any young man, anybody in general, but young men specifically, there's a lack of understanding and knowing who you are, knowing what being like. I've had friends, like people who are, I want to say, I have friends that are like in their 30s and their 20s, and they're just they're confused on who they are, what they need to do next, and then they don't know how they got in the position they have gotten in their life. And the book that you referenced about people who are playing roles, I feel like a lot of people are playing roles, or we look up to the media for who we should be, or our parents or whoever. We look up to other people for who we should be. And I think having these types of conversations lets people know that they're normal, and there's other people having these same type of experiences, and they're finding solutions to that. They're finding a way out of that to ultimately become a better version of who they are. So, I mean, again, man, thank you for writing this book. I think it's something that young men need to hear about. I think, like I said, young men need to hear about this, and I think that we need to keep having conversations like this. It's going to make things better for men ultimately in the long run. But I don't want to hold you no more, man. Thank you for the show, and
Thank
I'll
you,
catch
man.
you next time.
Appreciate it.